You think you're tough because you survived your high school football team or made it through basic training? Well, prepare to have your ego completely destroyed, because ancient Spartans were out there hunting 400-pound wild boars with nothing but their bare hands and a pointy stick. They did use spears, but calling it bare hands isn't that far from the truth when you consider what they were up against. These were enraged beasts that could run 25 miles per hour, had tusks that could slice through muscle and bone, and had absolutely zero interest in being anyone's dinner. Welcome to the world of Spartan boar hunting, where teenage boys prove their manhood by staring death in the face and somehow walking away alive. Before we dive into how the Spartans actually hunted these monsters, let's picture what they were dealing with. The wily big males of this region, with their razor-sharp tusks, can range between 200 and 400 pounds and could reach speeds that would make your morning jog look like a leisurely stroll. These wild boars had been terrorizing the Mediterranean region for centuries. Their tusks were curved, razor-sharp weapons that could gut a man faster than he could scream. The lower tusks constantly sharpened themselves against the upper ones, creating natural blades that stayed deadly sharp throughout the animal's entire life. Wild boars were smart too. Really smart. They traveled in groups, posted sentries, and had memory systems that would put modern security teams to shame. They'd change their patterns, avoid certain areas, and basically turn the whole hunt into a deadly game of chess where one wrong move meant death. But here's the thing that made these animals truly terrifying. They were fearless. Unlike deer or other prey animals that ran when threatened, wild boars would charge straight at their attackers. A wounded boar was particularly dangerous because pain and rage turned them into unstoppable killing machines. They would fight until they were literally dead, and even then, their dying movements could still injure or kill a hunter. The Spartans didn't wake up one day and decide to hunt wild boars for fun. This was part of their legendary training system called the agoge, and it was designed to turn soft boys into hardened warriors who could face anything without flinching. Spartiate-class boys entered it at age 7 and would stop being a student of the agoge at age 21. But the boar hunting didn't start immediately. That would have been suicide, even by Spartan standards. Instead, boys spent years preparing for the moment when they'd face their first wild boar. The training was brutal from day one. The agoge deliberately deprived boys of food, sleep, and shelter. They learned to endure pain, hunger, and exhaustion because when you're facing a charging boar, you can't afford to be slowed down by discomfort. Young Spartan boys started with smaller prey, rabbits, birds, anything they could catch with their bare hands. They learned to move silently through forests, to read animal tracks, and to understand the behavior of different creatures. But more importantly, they learned to kill without hesitation. By the time they reached their teenage years, these boys had been transformed into something that barely resembled normal human beings. They could run for hours without stopping, fight through injuries that would drop modern athletes, and most importantly, they had zero fear of death. This psychological preparation was crucial because fear was the #1 killer during boar hunts. The Spartan hunting spear was called a dory, and it was basically a long wooden shaft with a bronze or iron tip. The dory or doru was the chief spear of hoplites in ancient Greece, but the hunting version was different from the military spear. It was shorter, more maneuverable, and designed for close quarters combat with wild animals rather than formation fighting. The key feature of boar hunting spears was something called a crossbar, or lugs. The pig sticker spears had short crosspieces near the business end, since the wounded boars would often continue charging up the length of the embedded spear to slash at the hunter. Think about that for a second. The spear was designed with the assumption that you would successfully stab a 400-pound monster, and it would still try to kill you by running up the spear shaft. This wasn't theoretical. It happened all the time. A wounded boar would literally impale itself further on the spear just to get close enough to use its tusks. The crossbar was the only thing preventing the animal from reaching the hunter and tearing him apart. The spear tip had to be perfectly balanced. Too light, and it wouldn't penetrate the boar's thick hide and protective fat layer. Too heavy, and the hunter couldn't maneuver it quickly enough to defend himself. Spartan smiths spent years perfecting these weapons, and each spear was custom fitted to its owner's height, strength, and fighting style. Spartan boar hunting wasn't like modern hunting where you set up in a blind and wait for animals to wander by. This was active hunting, tracking, pursuing, and engaging the prey in direct combat. And it all started with finding the boar, which was an art form in itself. Wild boars were nocturnal creatures that spent their days sleeping in dense thickets, caves, or other hiding spots that provided protection from predators and the hot Mediterranean sun. Finding them required skills that took years to develop. Spartan hunters looked for signs: fresh tracks in mud or soft earth, disturbed vegetation where boars had been feeding, wallows where they rolled to cool off and remove parasites, and most importantly, the distinctive smell of wild boar. These animals had a musky, penetrating odor that experienced hunters could detect from hundreds of yards away. But finding the boar was just the beginning. The real challenge was getting close enough to engage it without being detected. Wild boars had excellent hearing and smell, and they were constantly alert for danger. A single snapped twig or shift in wind direction could send the animal fleeing, or worse, charging straight at the hunter. Young Spartans learned to move through forests like ghosts. They studied wind patterns, learned to step silently on different types of ground, and developed an almost supernatural ability to sense the presence of animals. Once a boar was located, the real test began. Thrown spears rarely had enough force to penetrate a boar's thick hide and fat layer, and missing meant facing an enraged animal with no weapon at all. Spartan boar hunting was about getting close enough to thrust the spear directly into the animal's vital organs. This meant approaching within arm's reach of a creature that could kill you instantly if you made a single mistake. The ideal target was the heart, located behind the boar's front leg. But reaching it required perfect timing, incredible strength, and nerves of steel. The hunter had to wait for the exact moment when the boar's front leg moved forward, exposing the vulnerable area. Then drive the spear through layers of muscle, fat, and bone with enough force to reach the heart. A less than lethal strike could spell serious injury or death to the hunter. There were no second chances in boar hunting. Either you killed the animal with your first strike, or you'd better be prepared to fight for your life. The spear thrust had to be perfect. Too high, and you'd hit the shoulder bone and barely wound the animal. Too low, and you'd miss the heart entirely. Too shallow, and you'd only enrage the boar without stopping it. The margin for error was essentially zero. Young Spartans practiced this thrust thousands of times on training dummies, dead animals, and eventually live prey. They learned to judge distances perfectly, to compensate for the boar's movement, and to put their entire body weight behind the spear thrust. But no amount of practice could fully prepare them for the moment when they faced their first live boar. The actual confrontation between hunter and boar was typically over in seconds, but those seconds felt like hours. Everything depended on split-second timing, perfect technique, and absolute fearlessness. Most boar hunts began with the hunter approaching the animal's resting place as quietly as possible. The goal was to get close enough to make the kill before the boar fully woke up and became alert. But wild boars were light sleepers, and they often detected the hunter's presence at the last moment. When a boar realized it was being hunted, it had two options: flee or attack. Fleeing boars were actually more dangerous than attacking ones because they were unpredictable. They might run in any direction, including straight at the hunter, and their panic made them even more aggressive than usual. Attacking boars, on the other hand, followed predictable patterns. They'd charge straight at the hunter with their heads down, using their tusks as weapons. This actually gave skilled hunters an advantage because they could anticipate the animal's movements and position themselves accordingly. The key to surviving a boar charge was staying calm and holding your ground. Running was usually futile because boars were faster than humans over short distances. Instead, the hunter had to brace his spear, aim for the charging animal's chest, and drive the point home with perfect timing. This required incredible courage. Imagine a 400-pound monster charging at you at 25 miles per hour. and your only defense is a pointed stick. Your natural instinct would be to run, dodge, or do anything except stand there and wait for the animal to impale itself on your spear. But that's exactly what successful boar hunters had to do. While Spartans were famous for their individual prowess, they weren't stupid. They understood that hunting wild boars alone was unnecessarily dangerous, even for warriors of their caliber. That's why they developed sophisticated hunting dogs specifically bred for boar hunting. From the start, it appears that hounds were trained to help the hunters. But these weren't ordinary dogs. Spartan hunting dogs were bred for courage, strength, and the ability to work as a team against dangerous prey. The dogs served multiple purposes in boar hunting. First, they could track boars much more effectively than humans. Their superior sense of smell allowed them to follow trails that were invisible to human hunters, and they could detect the presence of boars from much greater distances. Second, the dogs could surround and distract the boar during the actual hunt. Bay dogs to locate the boar and alert the hunters, and catch dogs to dart in, bite, and cling to the boar's hind legs or ears. This gave the human hunter crucial seconds to position himself for the killing thrust. But working with hunting dogs required its own set of skills. The hunter had to coordinate with the dogs, avoid accidentally spearing his own animals, and maintain control of the pack even in the chaos of combat. Dogs could be injured or killed by boars, and losing a valuable hunting dog was considered a serious failure. Training hunting dogs was almost as difficult as training the hunters themselves. The dogs had to be brave enough to face wild boars without hesitation, but disciplined enough to follow commands even in life or death situations. They learned to work as a coordinated team, with each dog playing a specific role in the hunt. While individual prowess was highly valued in Spartan culture, boar hunting was often conducted in groups. This was because group hunting was more effective and allowed for training multiple hunters simultaneously. Spartan hunting groups typically consisted of 3 to 5 hunters, each with specific roles and responsibilities. The lead hunter, usually the most experienced, would make the killing thrust. The other hunters would position themselves to prevent the boar from escaping and to provide backup if the primary hunter was injured or killed. Group hunting also allowed for more complex tactics. Multiple hunters could drive a boar toward a specific location where the terrain favored the hunters. They could set up ambushes, coordinate attacks from different directions, and provide mutual support during the most dangerous moments of the hunt. But group hunting required incredible coordination and trust. In the heat of combat, with a wounded boar thrashing around and hunters trying to avoid each other's weapons, split-second communication was essential. Spartan hunters developed their own system of hand signals and verbal commands that allowed them to coordinate their actions without alerting the prey. The hierarchy within hunting groups reflected broader Spartan society. Older, more experienced hunters commanded absolute respect and obedience from younger ones. This was preparation for military service, where the same command structure would be used in battle. Not every boar hunt ended successfully. In fact, hunting accidents were common enough that they were considered an acceptable part of Spartan training. Young hunters who were killed or maimed during boar hunts were remembered as heroes who died in the pursuit of excellence. The most common cause of hunting accidents was hesitation. A hunter who paused at the crucial moment, who failed to commit fully to the attack, or who allowed fear to affect his judgment was likely to be killed or seriously injured. Wild boars could sense uncertainty, and they were quick to exploit any weakness. Spear malfunctions were another major cause of accidents. A spear that broke on impact, a poorly fitted spearhead that came loose, or a shaft that snapped under pressure could leave a hunter defenseless against an enraged boar. This is why Spartan hunters spent so much time maintaining their weapons, and why they often carried backup spears. Even successful hunts could turn deadly if the hunter made mistakes after the initial attack. A dead boar could suddenly revive an attack, or other boars in the area could be attracted by the noise and blood. Hunters had to remain alert and ready to fight even after their primary target was down. Injuries from boar hunting were considered badges of honor among Spartans. Scars from boar tusks were proudly displayed, and hunters who had survived particularly dangerous encounters were held in high esteem. but serious injuries could end a warrior's career before it even began, making boar hunting a high-stakes gamble with a young man's future. Perhaps the most important aspect of Spartan boar hunting was psychological. The hunt was designed to break down a young man's fear of death and rebuild him as a warrior who could face any threat without hesitation. Facing a charging wild boar was one of the most terrifying experiences a human could endure. The animal's size, speed, and obvious intent to kill triggered every survival instinct in the human body. The natural response was to flee, but successful hunters had to overcome this instinct and stand their ground. This psychological training was crucial for military service. In battle, Spartan warriors would face charging cavalry, advancing infantry, and other terrifying sights. A soldier who had already conquered his fear of death while facing a wild boar would be much more effective in combat. The hunt also taught hunters to think clearly under extreme pressure. When a boar was charging, there was no time for doubt or second guessing. The hunter had to assess the situation instantly, make split-second decisions, and execute them flawlessly. This mental discipline was exactly what was needed in warfare. But the psychological effects weren't always positive. Some young hunters never recovered from traumatic hunting experiences. They might become reckless, seeking out increasingly dangerous prey to prove their courage. Others might develop an obsession with hunting that interfered with their other duties as Spartan citizens. A young man who excelled at boar hunting was marked for leadership roles, while those who failed or showed cowardice were relegated to lower positions in society. Successful boar hunters were celebrated throughout Spartan society. Their exploits were retold in stories, their techniques were studied by younger hunters, and their opinions were sought on matters of war and strategy. Hunting success was seen as a predictor of military success. But this social pressure also created dangerous incentives. Young hunters might take unnecessary risks to impress their peers, or they might hunt alone when they should have waited for more experienced companions. The desire to prove oneself could override good judgment and lead to preventable accidents. The social aspect of hunting also created a competitive environment that pushed hunters to constantly improve their skills. Hunters who rested on their laurels or became complacent were quickly surpassed by hungrier, more dedicated competitors. This competition drove innovation in hunting techniques and equipment. While boar hunting was primarily a training exercise for young Spartan warriors, it also served practical purposes that benefited the entire community. Wild boars were serious agricultural pests that could destroy crops and threaten farmers. Successful hunters were providing a valuable service by reducing the boar population. The meat from successful hunts was distributed throughout the community, providing high-quality protein that was otherwise difficult to obtain. Boar meat was considered a delicacy, and successful hunters gained additional social status by sharing their kills with neighbors and friends. The skills developed during boar hunting were directly applicable to warfare. Hunters learned to work as a team, to remain calm under pressure, and to use weapons effectively in close combat. These were exactly the skills needed for the close quarters fighting that dominated ancient warfare. But perhaps most importantly, boar hunting taught young Spartans that they were capable of overcoming seemingly impossible challenges. A young man who had successfully killed a wild boar knew that he could face any enemy in battle. This confidence was one of the key factors that made Spartan warriors so effective. We live in a world where the most dangerous thing most people face is traffic on the way to work. We have safety regulations, insurance policies, and emergency services to protect us from danger. The idea of voluntarily facing a 400-pound killing machine with nothing but a spear is so foreign to our experience that we can barely comprehend it. Spartan hunters could run for hours through rough terrain, fight through injuries that would hospitalize you, and maintain perfect focus even when exhausted and in pain. They had been conditioned from childhood to ignore discomfort and push through obstacles that would stop them in their tracks. The next time you're feeling tough because you completed a challenging workout or handled a difficult situation at work, remember that Spartan teenagers were out there facing down wild boars with nothing but spears and attitude. They lived in a world where proving your worth meant literally risking your life. And they did it gladly because they understood that some things are worth dying for.